Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Phase podcast, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, our local MP here in Hitchin, Alistair Strathern. Alistair, why don't you say hi to everyone?
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
It's so good to have you, Alistair. I thought I would start today's episode with a little bit of a quick fire Q&A just so our listeners can get to know you a little bit better. So I believe, reading up on you a little bit, that you were a maths teacher in the past, but what was your favourite subject at school? Was it actually maths or was it something else?
I have to admit, it wasn't even close. I think as a teenager, I would have laughed if I was told that I was going to become a maths teacher later in life. I found it, if I'm being honest, quite dull. My favourite subject was probably PE, but I was truly awful at it. I'm very clumsy, I'm very injury prone, but I loved running around as a kid. So PE would probably have to be my favourite back then.
I think we both probably had quite similar attitudes to maths at school, it sounds like then. But that actually your PE answer leads me quite nicely into our next quick question. What is your favourite sport, if you have one?
It's got to be football. Like I said, I've got no talent at it, but I try and make up for that by throwing my body on the line and not being afraid to get stuck in. So, big football fan too. Been an Aston Villa season ticket holder for a few years. They sadly gave it up just when we started getting good, which shows great judgment on my part. But yeah, football's got to be my favourite sport.
Oh, great. And if you had to pick one movie as your favourite movie of all time, could you pick one? That's a tough question.
That is a really tough question, actually. If my partner Megan were here, she would be putting in an argument to be able to pick all three of Christopher Nolan's Batman films.
Okay.
But as she's not, I think I'm going to go for Inception instead. I think it's a pretty perfect example of that kind of action drama thriller done perfectly well with just the right level of intrigue, cracking soundtrack, and a great cast. So yeah, let's go with Inception.
That's a good shout. And if you're anything like me, this next question is nearly impossible. Because I don't know about you, but I love food. But if you had to eat one meal for the rest of your life, which would be incredibly boring, but what would it be?
Well, I'm a giant kid at heart, so it would probably have to be macaroni cheese, if I'm being honest with you. Like, a good macaroni cheese is cracking comfort food. So, yeah, mac and cheese for me.
That's a good answer. Although I'm not sure I could cope with that for dinner every day. I usually say roast dinner for that question, just because I feel like then at least I'm getting some greens.
Variety.
Do you know what I mean? It feels a bit healthier, but that's a good answer. I like that one. And then kind of staying on the theme of food, if you could have dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Now, that's a really good question. I think for me, it would have to be Jack Grealish. You know, he was my favourite Aston Villa player in one of the most mad times to be a Villa fan, good and bad. And I think just getting his insight into what it was like, kind of captaining his boyhood club back into the Premier League, but also all of the madness of the Dr. Tony's era that came before it, and like the rise and fall of Dean Smith. And once we were back, I think, yeah, Jack Grealish, I think, would be a really interesting one for me, just for spanning that range of important time for Villa, and having such a kind of childhood connection to the club too.
Out of all the answers you've given so far, Alistair, that was certainly the most unexpected one. I wasn't expecting that, but I love it. Jack Grealish. And then our final question. Now, in our team here at FaZe, we love, mostly because of Kieran, keeping ourselves on our toes with some stranger questions, just to, keep our creative thinking ticking along. And so a question that I was asked ages ago when I first joined the team in the office, Kieran said to me, if you were a biscuit, which one would you be and why? Now, I know I've probably put you on the spot a little bit with that one, but I'll see what you throw back at me.
I think I'm going to have to go for, and it's going to be a cringe answer, but Jammy Dodger, just because I feel very jammy and very lucky to get to do what I do. Like, being a politician, being an MP is a job like no other, and I feel incredibly lucky to get to do it. So I'm going to have to go with being jammy like a Jammy Dodger.
Now, this is an amazing coincidence, Alistair, but that is the exact answer. Well, not the exact answer. It's the same biscuit, but for a different reason that I gave to Kieran a couple of years ago.
What was your reason?
So my reason, much less creative and actually well thought out than your reason, is literally just when I was in primary school, because my name is James, my nickname was Jammy on the school playground. And so that was your answer was far better than mine, but that's brilliant. A topic we love thinking about at FaZe, something that we're so passionate about, is this idea of building the skill, the characteristic of resilience in young lives. So I think it would be awesome if we could start off this kind of section of the podcast with you just sharing a story of a challenge you faced in your life. Maybe it's the biggest challenge you've ever faced, or just a challenge that you can remember recently. And just tell us a bit of a story about maybe how you overcame that and some of the skills or characteristics you used in overcoming that challenge.
Sure, absolutely. Look, I think, well, I mentioned how clumsy and accident prone I was before. And I think probably one of the toughest things I've had to go through in life was about 5-6 years ago now, I had quite a bad concussion, and that knocked me to six and then some. Back of my head got fractured playing football, fell hard onto hard surface, that kind of got double impact. And I've had a few concussions before, and so the sum total of them really did take its toll. And over the weekend, I felt quite dizzy, but by the time I got to work on Monday, I just physically couldn't take in what people were saying to me when anything on the street. And in the end, I was off work for over 3 months. And even after that, on a partial return for a month and a half before I got back to full speed. And over that 3 months, I guess as you would, if you can't really read, if you can't speak to people without, being completely wiped out after a couple of minutes, I got really depressed. I got very low. I felt very isolated. I felt very down on myself. And, with these types of conditions where you don't know how quickly things are likely to get better, you start to worry that they never will. And so I got quite a low place over that 3 months, actually. But I think for me, being able to fall back on friends and family and getting to the point where I can at least talk a bit openly with people I know, whether it be really good colleagues, really good friends, my mum and dad, and kind of getting comfortable with being vulnerable with them so that I could talk about how it's feeling. I could talk about, my fear of this kind of open-ended nature of the condition that I got at the time was really helpful. It gave me a bit of perspective. It gave me a lot of humour. I mean, my mates are great at kind of taking the test in good nature.
You really need that sometimes as well, don't you?
Exactly. That's what you need. And sometimes as well, you just need some half truths as well. And you've got good friends and family you can rely on to kind of support, but also push and challenge you in the ways you need in life. And if you can invest in those friendships, not just in those friendships, but in those friendships in a way that gives them the confidence they need to know you and to know when to do that, it's invaluable. And so with their help, with their support, and to be fair too, with the support of, I was working at the Bank of England at the time, and they were a very good employer in terms of being supportive of it and not kind of take it out on me and not making me feel like I had to come back to work tomorrow or it would all be over. I was able to kind of get through it, get back to a place where I was, back at work, starting to get back into the swing of things. And thankfully, now I look back on that and it feels like a very strange blip. But I say, yeah, that is probably one of the toughest things that's happened to me, and a salutary lesson in making sure you take care of your head when you're out playing.
Yeah, definitely important to say that, actually. Anyone that gets concussion, take care of yourself straight after that. Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing that, Alistair, as well, because when we speak about a lot of phases, the importance of vulnerability and seeing it as a strength and not a weakness, and leaning on friends and family in a time of challenge as well. And I suppose as well, like so much of what you said you weren't able to do, so speaking, reading, that's probably a lot of what you kind of built your identity on. That's probably a lot of what you see yourself as. So then maybe having that broken down and then shift into maybe, actually, but even though I can't do these things, I'm still a good friend, I'm still a good family member. I really appreciate you sharing.
Exactly that. I think it's having to kind of recognise and reinvent your kind of own view of your strengths and value at a time where everything feels like it's kind of slowly bleeding away from you, to be honest. And I think that's what it is having those relationships and that comfort with being, I guess, vulnerable and kind of challenged in those relationships. It's really important.
So it sounds like from our quickfire Q&A, as a kid, you weren't interested in maths, but you must have become interested in maths at some point to become a maths teacher. When and how did you become interested in politics? Was that something that came quite early on for you, or was it later down the line in life?
Well, so I think I've always been interested in the world around me. I think it would be fair to say, like, as a kid growing up, like I'd happily like listen to the news. It'd be something I'd watch sometimes. And I think I always found quite fascinating, not just what was going on in the world around me, but why it was that way. Why things were that way, why some of the challenges we faced exist, and why when things were getting better, what the root cause of that was. But I think the real push for me was actually when I left teaching. So I've been teaching for a few years. But I then got offered a job at the Bank of England, and having done economics at uni, it was, pretty much as close to a dream job as you could get. So I felt like I couldn't say no. But work at the bank, as lovely as it was a much more, I guess, kind of academic and kind of, I guess, a slightly more structured environment than the joyful chaos of being in a school. And I started to miss, I think, that kind of tangible human element to it. And I started to think about other ways in my life I could kind of get involved in things that would bring that back a bit. And in the end, that led me to stand to be a local councillor and to try and make a difference on a more kind of one-to-one local level in the area I was living in at the time. And I think that for me was then the kind of foundational point, having always been interested in politics, but not particularly kind of motivated necessarily to do anything more than that. That kind of push to look for ways to get back, I guess, some of that tangible impact I felt I've been able to have as a teacher. But it's always a bit tougher to get when you're sat at the back of England working on economics challenges. Was the real push for me, and I loved it. It was incredibly rewarding, difficult at times, a really privileged opportunity to get to help make a difference on things small and slightly bigger in the end too. And I think it all kind of then grew from there.
Wow, so you've been on quite a journey from maths teacher to the Bank of England to councillor to local MP. It's crazy. So as a young person, it sounds like you were quite interested in politics, or at least the news, things going on around you and the world around you. What issues do you think are most relevant to young people today? What should young people be caring about? And in your role as an MP, do you see opportunities for young people to get involved in politics?
Oh, definitely. I feel like this is a really high stakes moment politically, both across the country, but also across the world too. I feel like there are, for most of my kind of childhood and early adulthood, kind of issues around equality, diversity, and kind of recognition of people's own identities. Issues like climate change and kind of tackling some of the big global challenges and global poverty, and issues around openness and I guess confidence and integration in the world and with kind of other countries around the world, all felt like they were broadly moving in one direction. And if you're kind of my political view and kind of progressive in your political outlook, they all felt like they were moving slowly in might like sometimes, but forward. And I think for the first time in a long time, given disruption on the political stage from Trump right across Europe, all of those challenges feel like they're a bit more up in the air. And so I think actually, for the first time in a long time, there's some pretty big high stakes questions that politics can answer or not, as people choose to engage and as people choose to kind of decide. And so I think for young people coming into the world and coming into politics, coming into voting now, it is probably the most consequential time to be getting involved, because whatever your view on these issues, it is the first time in a long time where the future direction of travel, whether we continue to kind of support people and kind of support equalities issues, whether we continue to kind of tackle climate change and prioritise action to protect the environment, those issues will be decided in the next few years. And it'll be young people getting involved, on all sides of the debate that will help shape that. And I think it's also a really important time in terms of kind of shaping the kind of, not just the political discourse, but kind of wider social discourses too, and how those impact kind of young people and people right across the country. We've all seen, whether in adolescence or kind of the rise of Andrew Tate and other more extreme voices online, I think the way in which social media has transformed the world around us and transformed the way all of us, and particularly young people, engage with ideas, engage with debate, engage with some of the big topics that people have been discussing over the last few years. And the tone of that, the way in which young people decide they want that debate to take place, the platforms they want it to happen on, the way in which it's shaped, the issues which define it, are all in our gift. Because, social media is ultimately, algorithms aside, a kind of collection of all of us and all of our discourse. Yeah. And I think, again, as kind of scary as that can be and as damaging as some of the aspects of social media can be, and I think there's certainly a lot more we need to do to make sure we're keeping young people safe and protecting them from the worst extremes of that. It's also an empowering platform for young people to be able to get more involved in some of these big debates and discussions.
Yeah, as a phase team, I'm glad you brought up that sort of penultimate point there. We've all watched Adolescence that's come out on Netflix recently. And it's a very difficult watch, but it does an incredible job of highlighting the potential negative impacts of social media and the digital landscape that young people, and particularly young men, are living in. But I suppose, as you've just touched on there as well, actually I suppose where young people can get involved in politics today and have found their voice and know so much, like as a youth worker that goes into schools, I see how much young people know about what's going on in the world. And actually having that platform via social media actually can give them a voice and give them a chance to impact politics. But also, as I said about adolescence, like sometimes on those platforms, when we turn on the news, when we look at our Instagram feed, when young people are scrolling through TikTok, It can seem like today's news cycle is endlessly negative, and we know, unfortunately, how divisive politics can seem these days as well. So for you in your role as an MP, being someone that's heavily involved in the political landscape, where do you think we can find hope in politics still?
I think there's always exciting reasons to be hopeful. And to touch on a few, I think, that kind of unfold over recent years. One, I think, over my lifetime, we've gone from a situation where, if I think about, as a kid growing up, the minimum wage didn't exist. There weren't many protections for people in work. We've got to a point where the minimum wage isn't just it's an accepted part of the political reality by all parties. And it's now just a given that there will be a floor on how much we pay people in a floor, making sure that we're supporting some of those on the lowest incomes. And that for me is quite a good example of how something can go quite quickly from being considered too radical, too extreme, too contestable, to completely accepted, to actually very well supported. Even the Conservative government, who'd been opposed to the minimum wage when it first came in, made a big deal about some of their efforts to improve that. And so I think for me, that's the salutary lesson that actually you can change things, and things are there to be changed. And I think that the exciting thing for me in this kind of really volatile world is whether it's, the way in which our new government's been able to kind of really transform the UK's approach to climate change policy, and the pace at which we're starting to move towards renewable energy now. And the way in which, things like the way in which social media suddenly starts to empower young people, as well as, bring forward all the risks that we talked about earlier, I think is quite exciting too. And so I think, for me, the hopeful thing above all else, alongside those concepts, alongside all of the kind of politics that goes along with those, is the fact that whenever I go to a school, whenever I do, visits some of the secondary or primary schools around the area, we've got young people brimming with ideas, bringing with a commitment, and I think very aware of the fact that they're coming into a world that they don't have to accept as it is. They have a part to play in shaping it, and that they are coming into that world at a time where actually there is a lot that can be shaped. And, for all the hopes I take from little bits and pieces of things, from political wins, from national wins, from, some of the amazing scientific developments that are cascading around the world all the time, above all else, I think that the thing that gives me most hope is actually going to schools, going to colleges, speaking to young people, and hearing their ideas, hearing their enthusiasm, and hearing their, I guess, refusal to tolerate all of the imperfections in the world they're coming into, and desire to make sure they're leaving their mark on doing it.
I think you're so right. I think, honestly, when I was thinking about that question, is, as someone that connects with young people a lot, is actually, I think that's where I find a lot of my hope, is that they're so aware of the world and so enthusiastic about the idea of being able to make change. But I also like that point you made about actually sometimes looking back can give us hope, and realizing that actually positive change has happened, and actually that reminds us that positive change is possible. Something I've become really interested in recently as well is this idea of like the Overton window. So as ideas become more and more mainstream, suddenly they become more acceptable to talk about. So even in recent years, it's become more acceptable to talk about climate change, and how we can positively change that, but also even being open and talking about mental health, like you shared earlier in the podcast. Actually, what used to be quite extreme is now acceptable to talk about, thanks to kind of young voices, I think, in a lot of those situations as well. So that brings me a lot of hope. Have you got anything else to add to that answer, Alistair? Sorry, I kind of cut you off there.
No, not at all. I think you've encapsulated that pretty perfectly, actually.
My final question for today's podcast, I would love you to cast your mind back to when you were a teenager. And if you could give your teenage self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'm going to be cheeky and go for two, because I couldn't.
That's fine by me.
Say, get a haircut as piece of advice number one. Like, I had this long, scaggy hair as a kid.
Honestly, Alistair, that's a great one. But teenagers these days have got that covered. Trust me, I feel like they're getting a haircut every week. That's a great piece of advice.
Honestly, I could have used, weekly trimmer absolutely back in the day. So no, that would probably be had perfect advice. And I guess secondly, just I think to have the confidence to kind of open yourself up to kind of people, and to kind of be be someone who's confident. I think went on a bit of a journey in terms of my own self-confidence, and I think my friends, particularly at sixth form, was such a huge part of me becoming the person I am today, and I'll forever be grateful for that. But I think, just finding that confidence as early as you can, and in your friendship as early as you can, is invaluable. So I think the other thing we're doing, just to try and nudge myself to put myself out there a bit more, because once I started to do it in sixth form and beyond, I never really looked back.
Love that so much. So yeah, just putting yourself out there, and it takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of bravery to do that. But coming back to resilience, so when we speak about phase so much is that idea of a comfort zone. And I think sometimes we don't realize it until we do it, that actually as we step outside of our comfort zone, suddenly our comfort zone grows. And actually what felt like a challenge 2 months ago, suddenly by being brave, taking those steps to be honest, to be vulnerable, to put yourself out there, to take on challenges, suddenly that comfort zone grows, and that ability, that confidence grows with it. I think that's such a great piece of advice. Well, Alistair, that is all we've got time for today. It's been lovely to meet you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the Phase podcast. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Much appreciated.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this month's episode of the Phase podcast. If you enjoyed it, we'd be super grateful if you could leave a comment and a rating. And as always, to stay in touch with all things Phase, follow us on our socials @PhaseHitchit.